And welcome to Commissioner in the Car. Hi, I'm Dustin Zarni, Onondaga County Elections Commissioner, Democrat, and also I'm your host for today's Commissioner in the Car. I hope that you can hear me. I'm here. I'm not in my car today. I'm here in my office at home as I'm at a work from home day, and it's too cold to go in the car. So that's why I'm here today talking in my office. Also, I wanted to have some stuff on hand to be able to answer your questions. Um, so today is Tuesday. It is February 9th, and we are looking at the oncoming of the second Fall in Love with Your Party Day. That's this Sunday, February 14th, is the deadline for changing your party in New York. And all, what does that mean? What does that mean for you as someone who wants to change your party, and how do you do that? Well, last year, Assemblyman John Jacobson and Senator Brian Kavanaugh sponsored legislation to change the way that you can change parties in New York. It used to be that you had to wait a whole year for your party change to become effective. That you had to change your party in October of the previous year to be able to walk petitions or a vote in a primary in that party. Um, and in the next year. So, but that got changed before COVID. This was something that was changed in January of last year, and that date was moved to February 14th. And it is on February 14th, Valentine's Day, uh, for every year, which is the party deadline or the deadline for changing your party. However, there is a slight catch to that because when they changed the law to February 14th, they kept the received by portion of the law in place. So, unlike voter registration or absentee ballots or other things that are done by postmark, this is a received by date, which means that the boards of elections have to receive your form by February 14th to have you have your party change effective for 2021. However, this year, February 14th falls on a Sunday, and many boards of elections, including the Onondaga County Board of Election, is not open on a Sunday. That means, in essence, since we do not receive mail over the weekend, the receive by date will pass. So we need to have those forms in our office by Friday, February 12th at 4:30 p.m. That is when we close our office for the weekend. And some offices around New York State are closed on Friday because of the holiday on Monday. And of course, then some offices are closed on Monday because of the holiday as well. We in Onondaga County treat that as a floating holiday, which means our offices are open on Monday and Friday. Um, so you're there. So you have to have that form physically in by Friday, February 12th, for us in Onondaga County to be able to change that um, change that form and change your party in time to vote in this year's primary or in time to walk petitions in March. Um, there is another way to change your party, and that's through my DMV. And you actually have until Saturday the 13th for that at midnight because they email that form to us the next day, and thus it will be received by the board uh, on Sunday, February 14th, even though the office is not open, and thus qualifies for the party change. Is this confusing? It absolutely is. Should it change the postmark? I personally believe that that should be the case. However, that did not happen this year, and I will continue to advocate for that to happen in future years. So, if you are thinking about changing your party, I suggest coming straight down to the boards of elections in your county and filling out a form in their office or doing it at my DMV as soon as possible, but definitely before Friday or if you're doing it on my DMV before Saturday, but I definitely would not wait until the last minute. Because if that form is not transmitted by DMV to the boards of elections, then it may not be accurately counted for next year. And it wouldn't be the boards of elections' fault. This is what the law states. And we do have to follow the law. Um, so that party change date is always February 14th. That's why I call it Fall in Love with Your Party Day in New York. And it's your time to change. You can change each year. Yeah, there is no prohibition on it. So you can switch from year to year to year. This year, we expect a lot of primaries inside the city of Syracuse, and maybe even in a few of the county legislature races on the Democrat and Republican side. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll keep you updated. We won't know whether there's primaries until around March 25th when the petitions are turned in. Um, so that is what we are looking at. John Tierney asked a question in our chat. He says, "Has there been any appreciable numbers of GOP enrollees changing since January 6th?" Well, it's hard to tell, John, because normally boards of elections are way behind in February with processing registrations. We have and in Onondaga County is no different. We are about 10,000 registration forms behind, um, and most of that is from the DMV. And that's because in the middle of doing an election, so from October 3rd through the end of certification, which was middle of December, we cannot process any voter registrations. So people are still changing their addresses. People are still updating their registrations with us, and it takes us a while to get to those. We have to get caught up again by the time we have our next election, um, and that will be in June. And so when the May, I think it's May 29th deadline is up, we have to get caught up before we go to early voting in the June primary. So, and many times we will be behind right up until the day before. Although I will say that in Onondaga County, we have always caught up and got done by that time period. We put in 12-hour days, we do overtime um, to get that done. So we are actually have found some grant money and are bringing in a couple of temporary staff in March to help us get caught up. We really want to get caught up by March 25th, if possible, because that's when petitions are in. Um, but we have to start ruling out petitions. But again, normally it's not something that is totally caught up during that time period. So we're still working on catching up. So I can't tell you whether there's been any appreciable numbers of GOP enrollees changing since January 6th. I can tell you that we did our snapshot in February um, for Onondaga County. We posted it yesterday on the Onondaga County Board of Elections. And looking at that data, Democrats are continuing to enroll at a higher pace in Onondaga County. We are now at 311,000 voters in Onondaga County, and almost 2 to 1 the registration since Election Day that we have processed have been Democrat to Republican. I don't know the date exactly, but I don't believe we're in the post January 6th portion of that quite yet, or not many days into that. I think what we'll know is by April is whether there's been a noticeable drop off in voter registrations in New York and in Onondaga County because of the insurrection on January 6th. We've seen those numbers coming out of other states, and it's possible that we'll see that coming out of in Onondaga County as well. And it'll be interesting to see whether that is in the suburbs, whether that is in the city, or whether that is in the rural portions of our county. And so, you know what? Let me do a plug right now. As you know, each week I do a Wonky Wednesday uh, article about voter registrations. And right now I'm in the towns. I posted Camillus and Cicero in each of the last 2 weeks. And tomorrow I'll be posting something about Clay, the big town, the big boy. Clay is our biggest town, and I'll be posting that tomorrow on my Tumblr blog. Of course, it'll be on all my social media streams as well. So I hope you take a look at that. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. If you have any questions about things that you want me to cover election wise, I'm happy to talk about it. But while I wait for some questions to come up, I'm going to talk about New York 22 and give you some final thoughts that I have about that. This has been a wild ride watching New York 22 from the outside. I am not a commissioner um, in that district, and a close race between Claudia Tenney, who is now the apparent winner, and Anthony Brindisi has gone back and forth as in court about who was in the lead and who wasn't, and a lot of different things came out in court regarding this election. And I do think it points out some holes in our system and some needed legislation that needs to come to address these holes and reform many of the ways that we do boards of elections and how we count absentee ballots. That being said, I do have to point out that most of the counties in this district, even though some had some small mistakes, performed admirably when dealing with counting absentee ballots in the middle of an unprecedented number of absentees, as well as an unprecedented number of challenges from both campaigns, and also, but mostly the Tenney campaign, but also a unprecedented number doing this all during a budget shortfall and a pandemic. Um, so even the mistakes that were made, I sum up into three different categories. You have the first category of mistakes that are made in every election and were properly caught and rectified during the certification process. And then you have a second category of mistakes um, that were made that really point out the need to change election law and in the way we count absentees and deal with post-election challenges. And then finally, the third category is the failure of the Oneida County Board of Elections to follow the law and the law that is in place. And it's almost germanely solely on the Oneida County Board of Elections in this race where these issues came up, where this category came about. So I'm going to deal with the first category, which is the normal amount of mistakes that would be rectified and caught in a certification. What is a certification? Well, many people don't understand that the Board of Elections, when they post their counts on election night, those are uncertified results, meaning they're unofficial. And we have a 30-day, sometimes longer, depending on court procedures, like we saw in New York 22, about 30-day process after the election day that we go through and we double check everything. And in that time period, you are going to find mistakes. And that is what that time period is for. The fact that mistakes happen is not abnormal. It's that the county boards of elections caught those mistakes and fixed them in those certified times. But there was a hyper amount of intense pressure on these boards and a spotlight on these boards. So these are mistakes that normally would get caught and fixed in a post certification process. But because of this hyper amount of attention, it was brought to the public's eye. Things like finding the ballots in Chautauqua County, things like a tabulation error in Herkimer County. These are normal mistakes. Should they have happened? No, mistakes should never happen. But that's why the certification process is in place, because we do double check our work, triple check our work, quadruple check our work to make sure that we have accurate amounts. These mistakes that have been brought up are mistakes that normally happen in an election and then are rectified. And that is why we have a bipartisan board of elections there to double check everything that the other side does to make sure that we get accurate results. So the fact that those types of mistakes were brought up in New York 22 are not abnormal and not any cause for alarm. It's the fact that they caught these mistakes, those boards caught them themselves, reported them to the court, and fixed them. That is the proper way to Then the second category of mistakes, or not even mistakes, is abnormalities that were found because of the way we do elections in New York. In New York, we hold all absentees until after post election day. And this is because up until 2020, New York has been an in-person voting state. We didn't have you needed an excuse to get an absentee. It was a hyper small amount of ballots when compared to the overall total that would go into the absentees, and thus you wouldn't have a lot of attention on them unless the race was hyper close. Well, in 2020, about a quarter of our ballots were done by absentee ballot. That meant every race had attention on it. Every race swung, and they were hyper polarized this year because of the rhetoric that came out of the Trump campaign and the National Republican Party, uh, urging their voters to not vote by absentee, but to vote in person. And that saw this big swing where Democrats were voting by absentee in higher numbers to protect themselves from the virus, and Republicans were voting on election day in higher numbers, and that's where we saw these large radical swings. So when you have this large amount of absentee ballots that are coming in post election day, then we really needed to update our challenge laws and our because when you're having the thousands upon thousands of challenges, systems that worked in the past, um, like spreadsheets and clip-ons and all of these other things that we've used and used effectively in the past, were overwhelmed. And this is where the New York State Legislature and the State Board of Elections needs to come in, um, and provide standardization by law to how boards of elections deal with post-election challenges. That's my opinion, anyways, but I believe it's shared by most commissioners that a proper guideline where each county isn't making up their own decisions on when they open, how they record a challenge, and what and so on and so forth. One of the bigger examples of that is Stickygate in Oneida County, and I actually don't give them a lot of grief over that because while it seems in hindsight to be a truly you know bad decision, it was a decision made in absence of any real ability to look back and see how you do things in the past. In Onondaga, a lot was made that they didn't that the judge made a lot of um, a lot out of that when challenges were made, they weren't written on the ballot in and of itself. Well, I can tell you in Onondaga County, we don't do that either. And in fact, no county does that because there's too many challenges to actually handwrite challenges on each ballot itself. That system was designed and put into law when we were canvassing absentee ballots at the polling places on election night and not at the Board of Elections later on. And so it envisioned inspectors doing that with a small amount of ballots on election night. And that hasn't been done since 2007, since we went to the new scanning systems here at the, in New York State. So, but the failure to update that challenge law in the last 13 years didn't really matter all that much because we didn't have that many challenges. And the challenges, because we didn't have that many absentee ballots. So it's definitely that is those failures, how we count absentee ballots, whether we wait till after election day, and how we deal with the challenges that are hyper partisan and put these voters at risk of having their ballots not counted through really sometimes no fault of their own. That's something that the legislature needs to address. And the New York State Elections Commissioner Association devised a series of recommendations on how to do that and sent that to the legislature over the last 10 days. And I know that they're going to make decisions on how to deal with counting absentees and doing challenges in the future. Also, we're seeing the no fault absentee constitutional amendment being put forward. So that'll be a way for the voters to have input on this as well, and whether we want this in the future. So that those types of mistakes are there. And now I have to deal with the third mistakes. That's failure to follow election law, and to the point of true dereliction of duty. And that's the Oneida County Board of Elections. I have nothing personally against the commissioners there. Uh, I feel for them. They were dealing with COVID and budget crisis throughout all of the pandemic, like all commissioners were. And but at the end of the day, you cannot do make the decisions that were made there that were made. Um, this is going to be shown as an example going forward of what not to do when running out of time. And all boards of elections are running out of time and in every election, and we're understaffed, and we need more staff because we're dealing with more voter registrations than ever before, and more and elections are happening quicker because we start on early voting 10 days before election day. So we've lost already 10 days of processing time that we would have had in the past. So when a board of elections is running out of time, they need to find a way to either get the job done through overtime or ask for help and at least notify the parties involved where they're at. In the case of the United County Board of Elections, it seems that about 2,400 voter registrations that were properly uh, submitted through the Department of Motor Vehicles at the end of the election were never properly entered into the Oneida County Board of Election system. They testified that they ran out of time, didn't have time to do it. Um, the things that bother me most about that was that it was not until late December, early January that we even found out about it. It wasn't even found out about it by the board coming forward, but a clerk coming forward and saying what happened. And that is problematic. Um, and so I do hope that that is uh, understood that this is not something that happens in every board of elections. In fact, I would say I've never heard of anything like this happening in any board of elections. In my 8 years as commissioner, my 3 years as caucus chair, um, it is a not a dis. I reject the notion that this happens everywhere, and I know for a fact our board works 12-hour days to make sure it doesn't happen. And so that was a problem. And also, the other problem was another law that was not followed was the universal transfer law that was put in place in 2019, or registration portability that allowed people to move uh, and update their voter registration by affidavit on election day, no matter where they were in New York State. They didn't have to move within the county, they could do it within New York State. And the Oneida County Board of Elections failed to follow that law when canvassing their affidavit ballots, which resulted in about another 700 or 800 voters um, having their affidavit ballots initially rejected. Now Judge Del Conte did act to resolve those issues. He ordered the Oneida County Board of Elections to register all the people that were not registered and then recanvass the affidavit ballots. And he also ordered them to apply the universal transfer law to the affidavit ballots that were rejected. And that resulted actually in an increase in the lead for Claudia Tenney. So some of these people who go around saying that these laws are meant to help Democrats over Republicans, in this case, the failure to adhere to these laws actually hurt Claudia Tenney, not Anthony Brindisi. So it is, um, it is worrisome that this has happened. And I do believe the Oneida County Board of Elections needs to be held accountable. And there's a lot been talked about that the county legislature had already reappointed them, and that is true. They acted, and that it points out another flaw in our system. Why boards of elections are asked to be reappointed right in the middle of election season, as opposed to maybe over the summer, um, when we're not in the middle of doing elections. That is a reform that needs to be taken into place. However, the calls for reform to totally scrap our bipartisan board of election system is wrong-headed. It is not. is not going to resolve the problems. It doesn't matter whether who is driving a car if you're not putting the proper gas in the car and the proper budgets behind them as well. So, you know, painting all boards of elections with this one brush of the mistakes of the United County Board is not helpful. And it's not going to resolve the problem. And it's definitely not going to resolve it in the short term, as a constitutional amendment to change the way the boards of elections are populated would have to go into effect. And it could take 3 to 5 years for that to happen. And it's not really known whether the voters would even agree to that. And it's also not known whether the legislature will. So I have always suggested reform. I'm a reform advocate. I'm a friend of the Let New York Vote Coalition, and I often get into sparring matches with even my own fellow Democratic commissioners and definitely with Republican commissioners about how far New York needs to go in reforming their election laws and how quickly. That being said, the bipartisan model of elections commissioners is a model that I believe is important and better than the other models that are out there in uh, other states. Other states have issues too. We see the amount of litigation in Georgia, Arizona, all of these other states that are partisan boards of elections, where elected county clerks are making decisions and changing decisions year to year based on partisan control of the boards of elections. We've also seen uh, other boards that are totally dominated by one party or another, um, maybe making wrong decisions because they don't have the input of both parties. I think the New York State Board of Elections, and also I think there's 6 other states that have these bipartisan boards of elections, has a lot of benefit to it. The benefits are that no matter what campaign you are, you have a person at the Board of Elections, Democrat or Republican, that you can go to and get proper information and be assured that you will be heard. So uh, that is important. Now, Judith, you're putting in there. What about making it competency based instead of party based? Well, who decides what the competency base is? Boards of elections and elections commissioners. There's not a cottage industry of this, and and the people who have the most experience are the people that are involved with the parties. They're the people that are involved with campaigns. They understand how elections work, and also, you know, civil service based institutions have their problems as well. I don't know if anybody has gone to the DMV. There's a lot of problems that any civil service based institution has. Having election professionals that are dedicated uh, to the boards of elections doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be party based or uh, civil service based. It means that you need to have proper guidelines and also proper funding and proper laws in place to make to hold them accountable, and then when people make mistakes, to actually hold them accountable as well. So I believe that bipartisan boards of elections are good, and I also believe the system, for the most part, puts in people that are competent people that have the necessary skill set to be able to learn the job, because it is not a job that you can train for in the private sector, and have the dedication to getting it done. So I believe in the bipartisan board of elections, but where New York State can act, they should. And New York State can set up modern election laws with guidelines that need to be followed and not suggestions. For example, early voting. Many of the New York State legislature were upset that some boards only did the bare minimum of New York of early voting instead of doing more. Well, in a time of budget constraints, there's a lot of uh, there's a lot of pushback from the counties, um, and that is problematic. So if you want us to do early voting sites, a minimum number of early voting sites, set that as the minimum. Don't tell us what the minimum is and then get upset that we're not doing more. And Judith, I am going to push back on this. It currently is often based on party loyalty, not necessarily on competency. I understand your issue with the Oneida County Board of Elections. Um, But party loyalty and competency don't necessarily come into play as much. Or I'm sorry, party loyalty does not necessarily come into play as much as you think. Boards of elections, I know them. I've worked with them. They're some of the most competent people in elections I know. So yes, there are going to be bad apples in every bunch, and they should be held accountable. But and I sometimes I get upset when parties replace competent boards of elections uh, personnel. That happened a couple of times this year in places which I disagreed. However, that doesn't mean that the next person that they're putting in place isn't just as competent. So that there's a lot of qualifications thrown out there, but I think I do a pretty good job as an elections commissioner. I think I'm engaged and active. I don't think anybody would say that I had necessarily traditional qualifications coming into the job. Because again, the job defies traditional qualifications. There's no school for election management. It's done by learning on campaigns. There's no school uh, for this, and there's barely any training. So usually, if a board of elections uh, commissioner is not competent, they are replaced um, by one party or the other. And it's unfortunate that the situation in Oneida has gone on as long as it has. So um, another thing that can be done is we need to look at funding of boards of elections. Counties starve these boards of elections. They are the least amount of money thrown per citizen helped. We interact with hundreds of thousands of voters each year, and we are doing it at about a rate of $4 to $8 per voter in Onondaga County, and it's worse in some, not many. I think only one or two it's worse in, and even the ones that have a lot of money don't necessarily have enough budget to get this done. And there's a wide variety of how we budget these because we leave it up to the county legislature to come up with the budget and then tell the commissioners, well, you're supposed to get the job done no matter what, so you have to spend no matter what what is in your budget, which leads to friction with the county legislature, which appoints the boards of commissioners. A standard level of funding needs to be set, knowing the minimum amount of work that we have to do as a board of elections now that all these reforms have come into place. That is something that needs to happen. It's only can happen through the New York State Legislature. So if you want reform, you should talk to your state senators and assembly people and talk to them not just about how boards of elections are picked that may or may not change for the next 5 years, but how we fund them and how we change the laws to give the current boards of elections guidelines to operate effectively. So I do hope that the New York 22 situation uh, kind of points out us in the right direction and not scapegoating all elections commissioners as opposed to looking at the issues that were happening in a certain board of elections and then finding ways to help the other 56 boards of elections that are out there um, and making sure they operate efficiently and are funded to be able to carry out their mission. So that's the end of my rant on New York 22. On Thursday, I will be posting a Zoom with Zarni with No Ink. No Ink is our poll pad vendor, and they also operated in Georgia and some of these other places. And they're nationwide. They're one of the largest electronic poll book vendors out there, and they're the ones in Onondaga County. So I will be posting that on Thursday. It's going to be a great interview. I hope. I haven't had it yet, but I'm sure it will be. And I'm going to start doing some of these interviews with election vendors that we use in Onondaga County, so you can see the kind of dedication that these vendors have in getting this work done. Because a lot has been made about election vendors in the post-election process on the national scale, and I hope to be bringing a few of those in. I'm actually going to be scaling down my Zoom with Zarnies for the next couple of weeks, probably the next 2 months, going down to one a week instead of two a week. Um, and then after April, once we know who the candidates are, I'll probably be going back up to 2 weeks so you can get some interviews with some of the Democratic candidates that are out there that are going to be on the ballot this fall. So it's going to be just on Thursday. No Sunday Zoom with Zarnies going forward, just on Thursday until April. But I'll still be doing my Tuesday Commissioner in Car. And again, this Wednesday, I'll be dropping a wonky Wednesday for the town of Clay. And that is going to be the big boy, the biggest town in Onondaga County. We'll be looking at the registration activity in that town over the last 12 years. And I think it's going to be interesting to look at. So thank you very much. And remember, party change deadline is this Friday. If you want to change your party, please have that form into the boards of elections by Friday or into the DMV online by midnight on Saturday. Thank you very much. And I'll see you around. Bye-bye.